Hi everybody, it's great to be back here again on Itzamar. It's Friday. Let's get down to our Torah lesson for Shabbat. This week's portion is Parashat Eykev. I really want to focus on just a few verses that deal with a very important part of our lives. If we look in Deuteronomy chapter 8, let me read a few verses. We'll start from verse number 7. I'll read a few verses here and then we'll get into our discussion. It says, Ki Hashem Elokecha meviacha el eretz tova, because God brings you to a good land. Eretz nachalei mayim, a land of beautiful rivers. Ayanotu tohomot, reservoirs, springs. Yotzim bavika ubahar, that come out in the valleys and the mountains. A beautiful description of the terrain of the land, of the beautiful bounty of water in the land of Israel. Eretz chita usora, a land of wheat and barley. V'gefen uteina, and the grapevines and the fig trees, pomegranates, eretz shemen udvash, olives. As a matter of fact, right there, boy, I usually talk right in front of my olive tree, but the olive tree is behind me now because of the sun over here. I don't want to sit in the sun, but whatever it is, we see a beautiful description of the different 7 species of the land Israel is blessed for. And then it goes on to say, and we'll mention in verse 9, Eretz asher lo meskenut tochal ba lechem lo techsar kol ba, land you're not going to be eating bread, and meaning in a skimpy way. God's going to give you bounty and you will not miss anything in the land. And it says Eretz asher avanei barzel, a land that its stones are iron. Umehareah tachtzov nechoshen, from its mountains you can actually take out copper, which means minerals as well. There is in the land of Israel. Beautiful land with a lot of natural resources the Torah is describing. And then it goes on to say in verse number 10, Ve'achalta v'savata, you will eat and you will be satisfied. Uberachta et Hashem Elokecha, and you bless the Lord your God. Al aretz hatovah, for this beautiful land, Hashem natan lach, that He gave you. And then right away in verse number 11 it says, Hishameh lecha pen tishkach et Hashem Elokecha, you better watch and not to forget Hashem, Levit shmo mitzvotav, and not to fulfill His commandments and His statutes, etc. And then it goes on to say in verse number 12, Pen tochal v'savata ubatim tovim tivnei v'yashavta, if you eat and you'll be satiated and you'll build these big houses, etc., etc. And then it says in verse number 14, V'ram livavecha, you'll become haughty and arrogant in your hearts, v'shachachet Hashem Elokecha, you'll forget God who takes you out of the land of Egypt, who took you out of the land. So these verses, what are we really referring to? And this is a conversation we can bring out in many different directions. But number one, basically they're talking about appreciation to Hashem for giving us such wonderful bounty in the world. And we have to thank Hashem. The Talmud asks a very important question. The Talmud goes and asks a question, and it says, Birkat hamazon min haTorah menayin. How do we know that we're obligated to bless after, bless on bread, on our meal? Where does it say in the Torah that you have to bless when you eat a meal? So the Talmud right away brings down this verse, verse number 10, V'achalta v'savata uberachta, you will eat and you will be satiated and you will bless. So it's very, very clear that the Torah really says we must bless after eating food. But the Talmud goes on to say, this is a blessing for after. How do we know we have to bless before we eat? And the Talmud goes and learns it out. I'm not going to get into details how we learn out that a blessing is not only done after you eat the food, when you are satiated, but also before you eat the food. When you're hungry and you want to eat, you also bless before. And that's the very important thing that encompasses our lives, is the blessing of everything we eat. Because according to Judaism, we can't enjoy any enjoyment from this world without thanking the Creator who gave us this wonderful bounty. And that's an important fundamental principle of Judaism, to be thankful to Hashem who gave us this wonderful thing that we're doing and we're eating, etc. And therefore, the Talmud learns out the blessing before and the blessing after. But the question that's asked on the Talmud's question is, why does it have to ask, where do we bless from the Torah? Apparently it's such a very, very simple thing to realize that of course we have to bless. It's like saying, where does it say we have to celebrate the holiday of Passover or the holiday of Sukkot in the Torah? It's written right out in the Torah. So why do we have to say, where do we know we have to bless in the Torah? It's right here in this portion of Eykev. Why does the Talmud ask a question that the answer seems to be so simple? And the answer is, if you pay attention to the verses I read to you, we see that these verses lead up to a situation where after we've left Egypt, and God has given us the land of Israel, and then says you must bless and thank God for this special land. Wow, a person may come along and say, you know something? The blessing, we have to bless only, of course, when we enter the land of Israel, only in the land of Israel, only because God gave us the wonderful land. So therefore, what would happen in exile when Jews don't live in the land of Israel, that times, hard times when God threw us out of the land, unfortunately, because of our sins, would that mean we wouldn't have to bless anymore? And therefore, the Talmud's question is, how do we know that we have to bless in every instance and not enjoy any enjoyment from this world, even if we're outside the land of Israel? But of course, the fact that the Torah brings the whole concept of blessing connected to the land of Israel shows us that a true blessing in our hearts can be fulfilled in a reality when we're living in the land and the life of Israel, a life of blessing. But anyway, I want to focus a little bit today in this lesson. We're only just beginning. I'd like to focus on a very important concept, understanding what is this blessing all about of Birkat HaMazon, blessing over after we have a meal of bread. What is it all about? And the blessing, according to our tradition, is divided into 4 different blessings. The first blessing we say is Hazanat HaKol, that God nourishes everyone, right? This blessing, Moshe Rabbeinu, Moses himself, is the one who enacted this blessing when the man came down from the heavens. Birkat Hazan we call it. The next blessing is Al Haaretz V'Al HaMazon, on the land. And that was Joshua. When Joshua entered the land of Israel and conquered the land, leading the Jewish people into the land, he enacted the second blessing for saying the blessing over the land, thanking God for the land. The third blessing we bless on building Jerusalem and the temple. These blessings were enacted by King David himself and King Solomon. They enacted the third blessing together, and that blessing refers to the blessing again over the land, over the Jerusalem, and of course the temple by King Solomon. And then you have one other blessing which was later on, really was enacted in the Second Temple period by a great leader called Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel. He was Rabban Gamliel, basically. He was the prince of the high court in Yavne. And after the terrible tragedy which took place in Beitar, and the destruction that we know of the temple, which took place in the year 70, Common Era, but about 60 some odd years later, there was a terrible, terrible tragedy when the Bar Kokhba rebellion, the famous rebellion against the Romans, took place against the leader of Rome called Adrianus. And how to say in English, Adrian, whatever it was. They circled the city of Beitar, and there's a story brought down in the Talmud and different places in Al Midrash of what happened relating to this the fourth blessing where Rabban Gamliel enacted for the blessing over food. And what happened over there? Well, as we know, Bar Kokhba was a leader who led Israel for about a 3-year rebellion against the Romans. Millions of Jews literally were living in the city called Beitar, which is located about 11 kilometers south of Jerusalem, today in the area which is known as Gush Etzion area. And the Jews were gathering there. And the Romans built a huge dike surrounding the entire city of Beitar, and shooting in ballistic missiles. In those days, the ballistic missiles were stones they would fire into the city. These huge stones would crush and destroy. And the great leader, Bar Kokhba, as a matter of fact, who Rabbi Akiva, the great martyrs of Israel, in the Second Temple, after the Second Temple period, he believed that Bar Kokhba was Messiah. He saw that the possibility of Bar Kokhba leading Israel to return and rebuild the temple. Of course, when it didn't work, but he believed that a great soldier, a great officer could actually lead the people of Israel back and rebuild the temple. But whatever it was, the city was surrounded by the Romans, and they were bombarding it with these rocks. And it was said about Bar Kokhba, the leader, he can actually take a rock and he can throw it back, catch the rock in his leg, and throw it back and kill the enemy just by throwing it back. That's how powerful he was catching these stones. Whatever it was, terrible tragedy took place. The Romans were really almost giving up, because what happens, Bar Kokhba would send out forces to raid them. In the evening, they would fight back and get back in. They had special tunnels. And what happened was there was a renegade who really wanted to get the Jews, and that was one of the Samaritans. He basically went through a tunnel of a biuv, Biyuv refers to a sewer tunnel, entered the city, and he whispered something to the ear of a great rabbi called Rabbi Eliezer Modai, who happens to be the brother-in-law of Bar Kokhba. Bar Kokhba saw this, and he thought that there was some kind of deal going on with the Romans, which he was very against. And in his wrath, he kicked his brother-in-law, and he actually killed him because of his power. He killed his brother-in-law when he was so angry to hear about that he spoke to this Roman, or this whatever it was, this Roman servant. He was a Samaritan, but in reality, he was in intense prayer. Rabbi Eliezer Modai, he was in great prayer, and because he was in great prayer, he didn't pay attention to what the guy was saying to him. He didn't know what he said to him, but unfortunately, the wrong impression came out, and that's what a terrible, tragic end. It was a matter of fact because of these tremendous prayers of this great Rabbi Eliezer Modai is what gave the power to his brother-in-law to be victorious in battle against the Romans. A lot of people sometimes pay attention only to the external things, the guns and the planes we hear in the sky, the jet planes, all kinds of other things, the ammunition, the ballistic missiles. They don't pay attention to the most important weapon, which is God, is of course with us and blessing us to be successful in battle. And when he eliminated his brother-in-law, eventually that was his downfall. He got bitten by a poisonous snake. He died, and the Romans conquered the city and literally massacred hundreds and hundreds of thousands of Jews living in that city of Beitar. The blood of the city was running like rivers, which was, the Talmud explains that it fertilized for 7 years the land. It didn't need any more to fertilize it because of the terrible tragedy that took place. But getting back to the enactment of the blessing, the rabbis, Rabbi Gamliel's court decided to make a blessing. What happened? The Romans were so angry against the Jews in Beitar that they did not allow them to bury the bodies. And the bodies literally were sitting there for a few years before they were brought to burial. A miracle took place that they did not rot. The bodies remained intact. And finally, when the Romans agreed to let them bury them, then it was Rabban Gamliel who enacted the blessing, saying, Hatov Meitiv, God who was, again, allowing them to be brought to burial, and that the fact they did not rot. So the question, of course, this is the fourth blessing, but the question really is, we can understand the first three blessings when we bless over. All this we say for this verse, again, what I mentioned here in the portion, all this is v'achalta u'berachta v'savata u'berachta. You will eat, you will be satiated, and you will be blessed. So the question is, wow, the first three blessings, I understand why they were enacted for. Because we see that Moses over the man that came down the desert, which is nourishment, of course, Joshua over entering the land, and King David and Solomon over the temple, Jerusalem and the temple. These are all very, very powerful, principles. The basis of the people of Israel. You need to be nourished, you need to enter the land of Israel, you need to build your temple, Jerusalem. These are all national, very important concepts that have to be, or principles that have to be enacted in the land, right? So we have to pray for them all the time, and we can see why they're related to eating bread as well. And we'll get to that in a moment. I'll explain that in a minute. That's something we can explain. But the fact that a blessing seems to be a very, very personal kind of thing. I'm putting it personal. A terrible tragedy took place of this place Beitar, and so many people were murdered. But to enact the fourth blessing every day for generations of Jews who will pray, Orthodox Jews, to this very day we say that blessing, over something that took place thousands of years ago, a couple of thousand years ago, after the destruction of the temple, over a city that was destroyed. Okay? How is this something that a message that's so important for generations, the message we're getting out of the story, that we have to actually mention it in our blessing? So, again, I'd like to mention, and again, we're always limited for time, there was a great, great rabbi called Rav Hirsch. We all know he wrote a commentary. He lived in the 1800s. He wrote a commentary again on the what's it called, the Bible. His name is Rav Raphael Hirsch. And he has a very, very interesting question that he asks as well. I think it ties it all in on this particular blessing of the Birkat Hamazon. And he says, if we see in the blessing, what we mentioned, this fourth blessing, which was, again, I mentioned, was enacted by Rabban Gamliel, he says we see something very strange. It says, Hu meitiv, hu yetiv, hu yetiv, hu heitiv, hu meitiv, hu yetiv lanu. It mentions the word hu 6 times. It could have really said it one time. What does hu refer to? In Hebrew, the word hu means him. It's referring to God. So God, who's kind to us, who gives to us, right? We say it 6 times the word who, him. It would have been, we could have said in one time, God, him, he does all these things to us, right? Who meitiv lanu, he makes it good for us, who meitiv lanu, etc., etc. So why was it mentioned 6 times, he says? Why does the word who stand out? And Rabbi Hirsch explains so beautifully and profoundly that here in the blessing over food, think about it, we're eating bread, right? And we are being satiated. So we see from the verses we just read in the Torah, the natural thing for people to do when they're satiated is to forget God, right? Is to say, okay, we have the expression that's brought down in this week's portion also, Kochi ve'otzim yadi asali techayil hazeh. My own handiwork, my own power gave me this might. Again, forgetting God. It's all about, this week's portion is all about forgetting God who has given us amazing bounty and nourishment. So here, Rav Hirsch is explaining that therefore it says we say in this blessing of Hu Meitiv, of the terrible tragedy took place in Beitar, that God has bestowed kindness upon the people of Beitar, brought them to burial, that really, that whole blessing is all about who? About Him, about God. And reminding us that He's the one who has mercy on us even in the most difficult times. Here in the terrible tragedy of Beitar, when so much bloodshed was spilled, but still God had mercy and allowed those bodies to be brought to burial and not to be, God forbid, completely wormed out and destroyed, and then they wouldn't be able to bring him to a proper burial. But here they're able to identify the bodies, a terrible tragedy, but a normal burial. Here we see how God has mercy even in tragedy, even when He hides His face from us, in a terrible time of destruction. So that message, Rav Hirsch saying, is that a lot of times when we bless Him, if you think about what happened in the story of Bar Kokhba I mentioned again with his brother-in-law, and he ended up killing his own brother-in-law, right, in his wrath. But there's another thing in the story I didn't mention to you, and I want to mention that now, is that when he went to battle, Bar Kokhba has a saying. He said, God, you know something? Don't help us and don't harm us. Please don't hurt us. Don't get involved. I'll handle this myself. That was Bar Kokhba's slogan. His slogan was, I can do it myself. And how many times in our modern times we hear all kinds of leaders who claim they can do it themselves without the intervention of God, and forgetting that God's in the picture. And therefore, this blessing is a reminder that without God, we will get nowhere, and all our success and bounty comes from Him. This is so important on the food, because we see when a person is involved in eating and doing very physical things, it's the most natural thing in this world is to forget about God. Someone's eating a nice meal, he's not thinking about God. But here the Torah is teaching us, yes, when you're doing the most physical thing as a human being, you have to bring God in your lives. Think about God. And the first 3 blessings are all about being in the land and building the land of Israel. And as we see, that's from the Torah, the amazing bounty of a beautiful land and being so thankful to Hashem when everything is going well for us. And the other blessing is when things are going bad for us. And we see how terrible the tragedy of exile, that was the last attempt to restore Jewish independence in the land before we went all the way out into a much longer exile for 2,000 years. It ended up in Europe and scattered, etc., etc. And we know, thank God, we're coming back to the land, but that long period of exile was a situation where God is reminding us through the blessing. This is what Rabban Gamliel wanted to enact the blessing. We're not going to forget about Hashem, even in exile, even when we're in the ashes of the Holocaust and we think that we're lost completely. God is still remembering us, is going to still bring us back to the land of Israel and bring us back to our amazing inheritance. This is all about the blessing. And this is what the blessing was enacted in that way. 3 blessings again to show when we're in the land, and redemption representing our redeemed state being in the land, and that blessing representing a situation in exile. In all instances we see God's handiwork upon us. We see His amazing divine providence upon us. And that's we have to open our eyes today in this situation in the world where unfortunately people have taken God out of their lives. And they're living a life of trying to mount wealth and all kinds of physical things, material things in this world. Not that they're not important. A person has to obviously live, but for what? For what is it for if a person doesn't thank God for the amazing bounty He has and do something good with the bounty He has? And that's all about blessing. Everything we have in this world is temporary. The only thing that is everlasting is our good deeds. When a person passes away and leaves this world, he's not going to take with him all the money he was able to amass and all his possessions. He'll take with him only the good deeds he did in this world. And that is what the message of the blessing is. You will eat and you will bless, you'll be satiated, And this is all, thank God for the amazing land He's given us. And even in exile, God forbid, now we're out of exile, but there are still Jews stuck there. Let them come home. But still, even in situations of when God hides His face from us, we remember that Hashem is the one behind our bounty and everything we have. And every breath of life we could take, we have to be thankful to God. But we have Shabbat Shalom, B'Sarot Tovot, Yeshurot V'Nechamot.